Hello, hello. This is the William Flack Housing Law live stream rather than the homelessness best practice one for it's 4th of November today. So hello to anyone watching, and hello Mike, Shannon and Karis up there. We've had a little bit of technical problems starting, so I'm sorry we're late. This is the so William Flack Housing Law live stream rather than homelessness best practice one for okay. So that means we are live, and if anybody could leave a comment. Last week we had problems with Mike echoing, and it was only me and Mike talking last week, so it may be that everyone will be echoing. I'm hoping that that's sorted now, but I've been clicking some things in preferences, but there's only one way to find out. So if anyone notices the echo, please let me know and I'll keep looking. So I have been so busy this week that I haven't had time to prepare for this as much as I'd like. I've spent quite a lot of time today just practicing the technical stuff so that the format is a bit better. But in terms of things to talk about, I haven't got much. I had hoped to read the recent judgment on eligibility, which we were talking about on Thursday, but I failed miserably on that. So what I did manage to do and very much enjoyed was watch Mike's video on why do homeless persons officers break the law so much. But as fate would have it, let me just get this up. The button that I need to press. Oh, there it is. So if I go to here, yes, you should see a little graphic of the thumbnail for that video, which I would recommend anybody watch. And if I could, not necessarily go into a stream of consciousness about it, but just if I just summarize what my understanding of it was, and then I had some questions I thought might be a springboard to a discussion. That Mike was looking at this problem. I suppose it is sort of gatekeeping essentially, but also a sort of almost willful approach to doing the opposite of what they're supposed to do. So I think the expression that you used that some management are guilty of is just find whichever excuse you can use to get rid of them first and just get rid of them. So this extends to, let's say, for instance, doing knowing that somebody probably is in priority need because of vulnerability, but just thinking, well, it's probably a 75% chance they won't get a lawyer and they won't know to challenge it. So let's just put a decision in saying we've carefully considered your medical condition and applied the law, but unfortunately your condition isn't sufficiently serious for you to be vulnerable. So we're not going to help you, and we're cancelling your bed and breakfast if we gave you that. Which is cynical. My view on that, and then there's a second element to it. So what you could say is there's the technical breaches of the law, but then there's a psychological aspect which is really interesting, which is that you wonder, why do people that go into this line of work end up, it's almost like sort of somebody that goes into work in a hospital just trying to harm the patients. Why do they end up behaving so badly? Is it something to do with, as you said, could it be that it just attracts a lot of sadists, or is there something about the job which means that human beings are too frail and just end up succumbing to negative forces? So my first question on that, maybe if I could just give somebody else a chance to speak, is Mike, could you expand on what your thought is? Do you think it's that, I mean, my view, I'll just say, is that I think most people who become homeless persons caseworkers do so because they genuinely want to help, or if they had a choice of jobs, they think, oh, this looks interesting. I'm concerned. I'm interested in homelessness. I know it's a problem. Maybe I could do that. I don't think anyone goes into it and think I'll teach those people a lesson. That I'll go into this and stamp out cheeky people applying as homeless. Um, so the question, I guess, Mike, is what do you think? Do you think it's that people with good intentions go in and get corrupted, or what?
So, yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a range. I mean, I'd say there are one or two people that go into it just specifically to use the power. I mean, I don't know many jobs where you can have that much power with so little qualifications. So there is that kind of person that kind of probably gets attracted to it. And I think there's a lot of ideological stuff that you kind of see within housing officers in terms of their views on various moral kind of issues, and they kind of feel like it's their place to, yeah, kind of use their position of power to discipline people or whatever it is they think they're doing. So yeah, I think I'd be interested. It's almost kind of like you could FOI it, but I think I would say the majority of housing officers have not worked in the sector before they come into that role. Now you do get some who go from the charity sector into it, but I think majority are just local authority workers, and they just work in another department, and they kind of, there's a vacancy, pays pretty good, so they kind of move into it. And I don't, and I think they're just moving in with essentially very little real understanding of homelessness, and they kind of often come in with those sorts of, kind of what the media portrays homelessness is all about, and that sort of thing. So yeah, and I was exactly the same. That's when I started working in the sector nearly 20 years ago. That's where I was coming from. Probably trying to be a bit nicer than kind of some housing officers, but I think so. You come into it, and I guess there's just no leadership in terms of like the direction of what you're actually there to do. So my experience of being a bad professional is when I was at the night shelter, and you're enforcing these kind of very very draconian rules that some knee-jerk reaction manager kind of thought was a good idea, and kind of so you do lose sight of what you're actually there to do. So many people are, bar, or kind of because they were perceived to be a danger or whatever. And it's just, it's just. So I think so. I kind of, yeah, I've got experience of being a bad officer or bad professional. Fortunately, by the time I got to the council, I kind of, a number of people kind of showed me the other ways really. But yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of like thoughtlessness probably. I think there's no real kind of ever question that people get. You're about to have a lot of power. You need to make sure you're using it responsibly. There's no kind of consciousness about that, I think, in the sector, and I think that's what you ultimately need. To actually fight kind of bad practices, to have that kind of understanding. So, yeah, I've got more to say about it, but I think I don't know if that partly answers your question, Will.
Yeah, maybe I could ask one follow-up question to that. Is when you were working as at Bedford, if you sort of had to do a sort of head count of who was a good housing officer and who was a bad one, how many of them would you say were good, and how many, or just as a percentage?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy. So, okay, right. Let me just be careful how I say this. So, there was an office. There was about 12 housing workers. So there was 5 or 6 housing options officers who did the homeless application process, and then there's like an admin. There was like maybe 3 or 4 that worked in the rent deposit scheme and kind of other related stuff. I saw good in probably more than half, put it like that. But yeah, I think bottom line is we all knew, everyone knew they were doing something wrong. And so I guess, the question of what's a good person, then, is a good person someone who kind of is a nice person, or is it someone who actually does the right thing? So I think, yeah, I think if they had a good manager, the majority of housing officers would have been fine. Yeah, that's probably the main difference. If they had a good manager who sold them a vision, kind of taught them how to do the job well, then I think most housing officers would be absolutely fine and wouldn't kind of fall into those traps of like, kind of vilifying homeless people as a way of kind of dealing with their own guilt, which I think is kind of what happens to some level. So yeah, I think, but I think the kind of the overriding culture was bad. I think a bit of echo there. Yeah. So anyway, so I think that's pretty much, and that's probably kind of borne out in other areas. I've only seen 1 or 2 housing officers who would push against the flow. So that's quite rare, I think, to actually for someone to kind of say something about it. There's not many, and yeah, they don't tend to last very long in the sector.
Well, like you said,
they might move elsewhere.
you said the management was so bad that the people would have to wait until the boss was away to maybe try and house a few people, which
Yeah,
um,
yeah, that's what it's like. Yeah, yeah. That's so. Yeah, given the opportunity, some people would do the right thing, and and did care for the people who were approaching the service. But that was the kind of culture where, and this was before. So this is before the kind of the new system came in, where they'd have to get cleared by their boss to actually okay temporary accommodation. So that's what it's like now in Bedford, I think. So if a frontline housing officer sees that there is a duty, they still have to run it past their boss, who, I would be interested to see how those conversations go. I think since I was there, they're probably less overt about everything. So back when I was there, it was just kind of real kind of lawlessness, really. But that's kind of improved, and there's been a lot of improvements in Bedford. So I'm kind of saying it. I'm sounding quite negative, but I do know that you can massively improve the culture. So these days, gatekeeping is the exception rather than the norm. So there's been a couple, there's been a couple of cases I don't think of this year that I've heard of, but it's and in the last housing committee which I was watching today, someone made a statement, we don't gatekeep here anymore. So I think the head of service said we don't gatekeep, we're not gatekeeping council anymore. So the fact they're even saying it out loud, that's a massive change, because before, like in a lot of kind of big charities, they won't even say that word out loud. They'll kind of, it's taboo. So I think the fact that they're saying it out loud, the councillors kind of in the housing committee saying similar things, I think that's a
well,
massive improvement. So
it's it's a bit like all my life. The Metropolitan Police have been committed to fighting racism, if you believe their press releases. But in practice, they've had more difficulty, I think. Um, but sorry, would Shannon and Karis, would either of you like to say anything? I mean, don't feel compelled to, but there's some comments I could bring in.
I think, just to jump in, sorry, Karis, but I think there's something interesting around how most of the homelessness charity sector, a lot of the workers have some sort of their own lived experience of homelessness. And I think that's something that housing departments within local authorities don't have. And so it means that even more insular sort of like culture and environment doesn't even have necessarily the humanity or whatever from that lived experience in the room. And I think it's also potentially something that stops charities maybe being as unproductive as sometimes they are. So I think there's something interesting there, because I don't think I'm not saying there isn't housing officers that have their own lived experience. There obviously is, but I think it's definitely not the norm. And I think it's an interesting one to talk about, like the consciousness of whether they know what's broken. Because I can imagine someone going from, I don't know, council tax department within the local authority, going over to housing because it's a slight promotion, it's slightly more pay, and they think, oh, that'll be a nice change. But they're going into a system that's designed to fail people. Like everything about the system that they're working in is designed in such a way that it's against the sort of vulnerable person, but it's also designed in a way of like it's structured, right? Like, so it's very, I would imagine it's very difficult to recognize a broken system that has so much structure and so much legalities around it and so much, officialness, because you just take that as no, this is the norm, like this is the structure, this is, the systems we're working in. So I think that's probably a big reason as to why people maybe don't recognize the sort of illegality often of their actions. And then if it's not a supportive environment, like how are they ever supposed to, like, one of the ways I learn is through questioning everything, which is slightly annoying. I'm sure Mike will remember all those years ago, the very first training I did with him, where I was just asking lots of questions. But it's the way I learn, right? So, like, if you're in a team and you're not understanding something, or something feels slightly off, even though it's the system that you're like told and trained to work in, you've got to have someone around you that you can feel safe to ask those questions. And I think so that's then also like an interesting personality thing of what housing managers look like and the structure of the power there, and sort of like if you've got lots of different personality clashes and you've got maybe like there's this whole colour thing that I was learning about. So you've got like green people, which are like more compassionate or whatever, and then you've got like red people that are more like firm with their decisions and stuff. Then actually the communication is always going to be an issue. So you're never going to be able to come to a solution around the problem if you can't talk about it. Yeah, anyway, I've rambled. Sorry, Paris.
I've never heard of that the idea of colours, but sounds interesting. But
I would also expand it wider. You've got the wider issue of there is that that the council do no wrong and they're there to influence the law, and there's that society view that that's what the council do. And the homelessness is not really talked about, and people have that negative view on them anyway. So when people go into a work culture where the society thinks a certain way, and there's no real accountability or transparency in what the council do, so they get to do pretty much what they like. I think I'll mind my words here.
I mean, so on that point, and Mike, you said about it being like in Bedford, like less overt now than it used to be. But is that a good thing, or is it just that actually it's more intricate, covert, and like almost more planned? And like, do you know what I mean? Or is it like, yeah?
I think the fact that they can't be so blatant has got to be a good thing, and I think it probably creates more space for people to actually to ask questions. As you say, it's really on the point. I mean, bureaucrats aren't known for being curious people, are they? In general, it is a very bureaucratic role. So there's kind of almost complete lack of professional curiosity, which I think may kind of says something about the issue. But so I think I think bottom line is, I'm sure dodgy. In fact, I mean, me and Shannon have known very bad housing officers to operate in Bedford not that long ago. But I think the kind of messaging that's coming from the top, and I think it probably creates space to be decent. I mean, I've probably talked before here about the street level bureaucracy, which is a really key book around understanding bureaucracy in general, and it makes the point that the most powerful person in the system is the housing officer. It's not the boss or the mayor or the MP or the charity chief exec. It's the person in the room, because no matter what they say, so whatever messaging you get from the front, from the top, and the messaging is really good. So as I say, the head housing board in Bedford now is genuinely, I think, a really good person. But no matter how good they are and how much they say, we want to care about people, we want to kind of have kind of soft skills, we want to kind of make people's experience good. You get those frontline officers who don't care, and again, no one's watching what they're doing in those interview rooms. So I think you've still got the ability to be horrible, and I think in Bedford there's probably that sort of like that kind of unspoken thing about let's TA numbers are high, let's get the horrible officers to go on duty today, because they kind of know what they're getting. Temporary housing officers, you kind of know what you're getting with a lot of temps, not all the temps, but you kind of know that they're going to be a little bit Machiavellian. So I mean, I'll go back in Bedford, and I don't know how there was a couple of key people, I'd say, are responsible for how bad that culture got, and it was a mixture of things. It was kind of like they resented homeless people. I think they very much thought it was the fault of the homeless person, and why should the council have to help them out? It's like, well, I think you're probably in the wrong job then, because that is what we're saying. We are saying the council is there to help people out as a safety net. So yeah, it's I would be fairly confident that you get similar things going around the country. So it's not just Bedford like that. So yeah, so I'm rambling as well now, but yeah, I think I think, as I say, I think in Bedford we've kind of, between us all, we've kind of made progress with that, and it's partly by kind of exposing the really dodgy ones again and again and again, and creating space for the good officers to come in. So I think, although we kind of make it sound like doom and gloom, actually, there's definitely been a shift over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. So yeah. So
do you say for the better or the worse?
For the much better.
Oh, good.
So
good.
I think in many different ways, as I say, like gatekeeping is the exception now, it seems. So obviously we don't see all cases, but I think that's kind of how it's gone. whereas before it was absolute standard. So if you think there were 10 single homeless people in TA 10 years ago, now there's 500,
No,
and
that's good.
the national rate increase is is basically tripled, whereas this has gone up by 50-fold. So yeah, it's clearly working, and that brings a fresh set of problems for the council, really. So, and I don't think they really would. I think Bedford still struggles to say or to kind of acknowledge out loud that other councils also gatekeep, although they are beginning to now. So that's really important for them to really plan the service. It's like, it's no good kind of not gatekeeping if all your surrounding areas are gatekeeping, because people end up kind of migrating towards Bedford, where that's not the way the law should work. But they're not doing anything about it. They know it's happening, but they don't really do anything about it properly. So that's what I'm kind of saying to them, is like, they should be pushing back on central beds and kind of Northampton and those kind of surrounding councils to get them to follow the law.
And this, just sorry, this is
No,
the other
please
thing I
go
don't
on.
understand though, because like in my mind, and maybe I'm just being really naive and really simple about this, but like if a local authority was like, oh my god, look at our stats, we were, gatekeeping and we had X amount of complaints or X amount of like LGO decisions upheld last year, and now we've got this many people in TA. Like, if it was me and me, obviously I don't work for a local authority, probably for a reason, but I'd be shouting about that stuff. Like, I'd be going to newspapers, I'd be really like proud and vocal about like the lack of gatekeeping. And I think, the reason why I guess that doesn't happen is because, like, collectively across the country, not just local authorities, I think the charities are as responsible actually as well. They've hidden this whole issue of homelessness, like not even the issue of gatekeeping, but they've just hidden how bad homelessness is and the reasons for homelessness, like the real reasons, under a different narrative and everything else for so long. I think if every local authority tomorrow made the decision to sort of follow the law and was honest and like transparent about it, I think it would break down the charity sector, and that would lose the whole like country a lot of money in sort of supported accommodation and everything else. And I don't know how you go about changing, because it's not like, like in one individual local authority it's changing the culture, right? But they're all interlinked with all the other local authorities, so it's a whole country system of like not just statutory services but charity services, and then you've got interlinking services, like we're talking about the homelessness sector today, but then you've got the domestic abuse sector, you've got sort of the general debt advice sector, which is completely relevant, like you've got the criminal justice sector, like, and I guess that's why government have said they're coming up with a cross department strategy, but that's not going to trickle down to local authority. As I've sort of said to Mike lots, I think, like, why don't housing realise that if they house people, they're going to save money in X, Y, and Z? And Mike's like, because they all got different budgets, Shannon. And I'm like, no, that makes sense. But so that would be, interesting, I think, of like, if central government are working cross department wise, but local government, I don't know how they will. I don't know if I've just made sense or if I've gone off on a complete tangent somehow, but.
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on something you said at the start of Shannon. So given that Bedford's done something I would say is really incredible, they are very muted about it, and I get the sense in the housing committee that you've got these different political parties, different politicians, who in effect are kind of saying we're spending too much on TA. No, this is not a good thing. Even though, so they I think there is that sense that they don't necessarily care that the law's been followed or not, whether or not they're saving money. And I think that's probably again something which you see at all levels of government across the country, where, as I say, there's this kind of covert understanding of what's really happening and what housing teams are really doing, and kind of how it is a bit like warfare. You kind of how many people can you get to cross the parish boundary and go to a different council, because if you can get rid of a homeless family, then you not only save housing costs, but potentially social service costs and all that sort of stuff for your council, which is why we're seeing London councils boot people up to Manchester, wherever, because it saves them tens of thousands of pounds every year. So I guess maybe another kind of part of the answer has to be central government reanalyzing how they structure payments and how they structure this sort of stuff, so that by basically just kind of telling councils to save money at all costs, save their own money at all costs. It's actually, on the grand scheme, it's much more expensive for everyone. But yeah, it's kind of, I'm sure there's some good analogies to kind of make that point better than I have. But
What I'll do, if it's okay, is I'll just come on to some comments that we've had, put them up on the screen. But before I do, I'd just like to say I would like to come back to this subject because I think this is another, maybe next time or another time, because I think this is at the core. I don't know what other people think. It's at the core of the experience of people dealing with this sector is the sense that the shock of people doing the opposite of what they're supposed to do and being nasty about it as well. And I'd really like to look at the psychological issues in more detail, the studies that you mentioned, Mike, in your video, and also the just the extent to which it is people or the system. So there's part of me that thinks that even if management were good, unless you had ways of motivating people, they'd all get burnt out, because there's a very strong sense of burnout at the heart that goes along with this, that people just get disillusioned and they've got no curiosity about, I wonder what's that, I wonder if I can find a way to help this person, rather than looking for an excuse not to. So if we could come back to that. And also, if anybody is listening or knows somebody else who's worked in the sector, I'd love to hear from you, because we're not, hopefully we're not just making you all out to be villains, as it were, and bad people. It's a problem which I think we could look at in a positive, constructive way, and hear from other people of what their lived experience of it is, or people who've had bad experiences as homeless persons, where I expect there's going to be a lot more people like that contacting, because it's a very common experience. So I will, I'll go back to this screen, and then hopefully I can bring the comments up like this. There's a few from Cheeseface, so I'll just take them. Sorry, I'll go back to this. Sharon, you've put a question here, and I'm sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. And you said, can I ask a question here, please? And without wishing to sound silly, Sharon, I think the answer is you just did. But please do, feel free to ask a question. If you're still there, if you haven't given up waiting for a response, please say what the question is. And anybody else who's thinking like Sharon did, that maybe we're not welcoming questions, as long as it's not, as Mike always points out, please don't say I have a problem with this or that, and then, because then you're putting your personal data on there. If you could phrase it, even if it's someone, I heard that somebody had this problem, or just ask if you can refine it down to a problem which doesn't involve people, then stick that on. But please put your question on, and sorry if I made a bad joke at the beginning there. So then we've got Cheeseface, and thank you for your loyalty to the show, Cheeseface, and your participation. I'll just go through your comments, and then we can respond. There's about 5 or 6. So that's I think I would say to this one, and please everyone else, if you want to butt in or jump in and stop me rambling. I think I've been doing this work since the first time I started dealing with homeless persons units was 1993 or 94, I think. And believe me, there were loads of bad ones then. And in many ways, it's just, to me, on a housing officer level, it's just the same. It's just different. It's just different areas of problem that they're actually misbehaving in. So the next one is, I think you're saying housing lists have become shorter and demand higher. Sure, but like I said, I think it's always been a problem, because back in the old days there was less temporary accommodation available, I think, and therefore there was much greater pressure to gatekeep and turn people away. So I think, did I miss that? That seems to be part of another comment. Someone who does the right thing, definitely. I think I think you were commenting as we said it, so I'm sorry I didn't get the context of that one. And this one, a pinch of compassion helps considering customers are at rock bottom generally. I mean, this is a very good point, which is that it's how you become dehumanized, isn't it, from dealing with this. I mean, I must admit, I have to keep doing this because I get clients and I'm busy, and I tend to think, oh, why can't they, why are they asking me to do that? Why can't they do it? Or, why? And then I think, no, this is it's easy for me. I'm not in their situation, and I should be more compassionate. So yeah, I mean, I think it should be institutionalized that people should get ongoing training to stop them becoming battle hardened and sort of cynical and uncaring and incompassionate.
I don't know if all housing officers like view their job as like a human facing job though either. Like I remember one of the first times I was like fully gate kept, and remember sort of obviously being in a bit of a state because I was sleeping at the time, and so it was like staying to this housing officer who'd given like a same day sort of decision of like not price, but it wasn't even as official as that. And they just said to go back to Bedford. But like I was like, don't you care? Like, how are you gonna sleep tonight? Like, really, like what? And like all quite calmly saying this, but obviously with emotion. And she literally just went, I'm just doing my job. And I was like, wow, like this isn't, I don't think it was even like a sort of like, it didn't feel like, someone who's at burnout and having to sort of like do that side. It just felt like actually they just viewed it as a job. And like the same way that you'd give out a parking ticket, that's what it felt like anyway. But I could be completely wrong. I don't know, Mike's.
I think that's the magic that makes it happen. It's so housing officers think their job is to save local authority resource. So in the video I'm going to talk about Hannah Arendt and what kind of a lot of her thinking, and basically she's talking about a particular issue, but she's basically saying, when you can get people to swallow a lie, which in this case is that there's housing stock, there's nothing you can do about it, it's a force of God, there's nothing we can probably do to change it, and you switch the job from actually we're here to house people through to we're here to save the count, we're here to not house people, we're here to save the council's resources, and with that you kind of get like the deserving poor, and they'll help people out who look a particular way. But by doing that, you kind of do this magic trick where they think that is their job. This is my job to I'm here to kind of protect the local authority resource, and they kind of, I'm not sure if they ever kind of consciously think that, but that's kind of where they get to. I'm just doing my job, and they kind of go in thinking, all these people are trying it on, and they kind of trying to get housed, and how dare they, sort of thing. And by doing that, that's where it will happen. So I think most people don't set out obviously to kind of deny people housing, but they think that's the job. They don't kind of think, oh, actually, there's actually rules here that the law states, and I need to follow those rules. That does not cross their minds. They're told in some way. So Professor Luke Clements talks about it like a game of Monopoly within a family. Like, no one reads the rules. You get told how to play by someone older than you, and therefore that's why we all kind of think that if you land on go, you get 400 quid, but that's not actually in the rules at all. There's a whole bunch of things which aren't in the rules at all, but no one kind of ever thinks to ask what the rules really are, or even gets told that there are rules. I mean, most housing officers, I think, have never read the Homelessness Code guidance. They've never had decent training, but they kind of they've got Google, but they don't think to look, because they think their job is to kind of keep you kind of get these really kind of bizarre conversations where they're genuinely aggrieved that someone might get housed at the end of it. They're like, there's a podcast I was watching. I won't get into too much detail for you, but he was in the job centre, and he just basically he's a really capable guy, and he basically said to the job coach, I want to get a job 55, 60k, because that's what I can get. And they kind of laughed at him and said, you're never going to get that. Anyway, that day he got a contract, and he went back to the job centre and kind of essentially waited around for this job coach to go and show it to her. And he said that when he showed her the contract, it was like someone took her lunch off her. There's kind of like this kind of personal investment. That kind of, it was like an affront to her that he'd actually gone and got this particular job. And I think there's that weird kind of thing where housing officers, they're disappointed that that someone's managed to kind of be over duty. It's kind of weird, but it's all kind of as I say, it's all this kind of weird sort of fake kind of fabrication of what's really going on. Yeah, it's definitely a phenomenon. It'd be worth really interesting to study it. There was a academic paper I read. It's from like 12 years ago, and I think it was something like rough sleepers. You can tell them by how they look or something. It's really basically it's based on housing officers' kind of statements and interviews and stuff. And they basically said you can tell the ones who really need the help, but the other ones they're just trying it on. But there's no kind of falsifiable kind of logic to that. They couldn't. If they got it wrong, they wouldn't know. So it kind of becomes this sort of self-enforcing system where you kind of look, oh, they look homeless, we'll help them, not realising that actually a whole bunch of other people are also homeless and also owe duties, but they don't look how the officer thinks they should look.
But you're also giving an untrained, under-resourced, unsupervised person a lot of power over people. So I've lost count of when people go, they laughed at me, they rolled their eyes at me, they tutted at me. You're speaking to someone who is really incredibly vulnerable, facing possibly street homelessness or rough sleeping, or they may already be are, and someone that can just roll their eyes at someone like, why are you taking up my time? That attitude, and there's no one to say that behaviour is completely unacceptable, completely inappropriate, completely appalling. You should be, they should be held accountable for every single eye roll. I'd be a millionaire if they were, and I think you give a lot of power to people that just don't know what to do it, and if they're making up their own rules as they're going along, that power becomes, they think they have more and more power than they actually do. And it just gets incredibly worse as it goes on, and they're going on completely unmanaged.
And it leads to it leads to infantilization though of their customers, which is it's not like a homeless person. Like, you're their customer, you're the housing officer's customer, you're a peer. Like,
They're
you're
paid
both
to actually
adults.
do the job to make sure that person's housed.
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
actually their job.
Exactly. Like, in any other situation, you'd potentially be peers. You're both adults. Do you know what I mean? Whereas that much power, I think, leads to then like a belief of you can't do this. You're childish. I'm better than you. And even if that's not obvious, but that's how it is to the other person, which is sort of what matters in this dynamic, isn't it?
There's I didn't mention in the video actually, but there's a controversial, famous study of the Stanford prison experiment. It's controversial because the science behind it wasn't great. Like, it wasn't technically even scientific what they did, but they got a bunch of young men and kind of throw them into a fake prison and basically allocate them prisoner and prison guard, and within hours they were committing human rights abuses. And interestingly, the professor the experimenter who was overseeing it couldn't see it either. It wasn't until his wife actually came in and said, "What the hell is going on here? What are these kids doing to each other?" that they actually stopped the experiment. But I think although the science isn't good, it resounded with a lot of people because as Karis was saying, you throw people in, you give them a title, you give them power. It doesn't take long at all before they're abusing that power. And I think there's no. I'm sure there's other studies as well about that kind of. If you haven't got accountability, then you just guarantee this stuff's going to happen. As I say, it's a psychological phenomenon. It's not just it's not the bad apple, wasn't it? The guy who did that, so a guy called Philip Zimbardo. His book actually was probably for me the turning point in my career. So he wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect, which he gives an account of the Stanford prison experiment. But then he was talking about the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuses and the kind of photographs they were taking of stripping down prisoners and stacking them up and stuff. And he kind of publicly testified against George Bush and said, or George W. Bush, and said, it's not just a few bad apples. The hierarchy goes all the way to the top. It stinks all the way to the top. So I don't see Cheeseface put out saying that the fish rots from the head down, or worse to that effect. I think that's kind of ultimately what's happening. It's not just a few bad apples. We're seeing the post office scandal, where the investigation team were particularly unpleasant people, but the whole hierarchy knew about it. All the Venables knew about it. And kind of basically played her part in kind of what will happen. So maybe one day there'll be some kind of reckoning for councils, housing teams. Who knows?
I wonder as well, like, surely office camaraderie has got to play a role as well, like, in the sense of like, or it's almost like trauma bonded, right? Like, you've got a bunch of people who are making traumatic decisions about really vulnerable people, and they almost all trauma bond as like a team together and like spurs each other on to like carry on making these decisions because, you know, the greater good, or like, and it's so easy to lose that sort of autonomy when you've then got a team of housing officers as well. I think that sort of community within housing departments on the professional side is also probably like playing an effect.
They'd be like,
So
of course you're right, Karen.
So I think I said in the video that they see themselves as victims, and they don't see how provocative being so rude is. So, you know, they get people kicking off. They, oh, you know, yeah, they say, "Did, you know, Karen, you're right. You know, that person really was unpleasant." And it's like, yeah, Karen, you just literally screwed them over, and they know this, and you're going to have a bed to sleep in tonight. They won't. And so, you know, you kind of you're back. This is why I say this. I've been in meetings where it seemed to me like the housing officer was absolutely pushing the buttons on the person to get them to kick off, just to get rid of them.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of one of the tactics I think the really kind of horrible housing officers use as a way of getting rid of people.
Sorry, Mike, what was the book by Philip Zimbardo called?
Zimbardo, yeah. So the Lucifer Effect.
Oh yes,
So
yes.
yeah, I mean, it's just because he did experiment in like the 60s, but he wrote that, yeah, well, in the noughties at some point. I think he's still alive. He's very old now, but yeah, just for me that was because that was kind of, I was working at the council and read that, and obviously I read it because I could kind of see what was going on and try and make sense of it. Yeah, there he is. And interestingly, he went to primary school with Stanley Milgram, who is another kind of famous psychologist guy. But yeah, so that book I just remember reading, just trying to make sense of this all, and just thinking, and so for me that was, having read the book, I was like, I read the book in September, and I kind of over the next couple of months, this is 2012, and I kind of said, okay, I need to do something, and I didn't at the time know what I could do, or you know what the options were, but I started to make records, as in like written records of things that I would see, and that's kind of that eventually led me to Whistleblow using that report. But it was kind of he puts the challenge out saying everyone's got a choice to make. You know, everyone's in a situation where they're in abuses of power and seeing abuses of power going on, and so what are you going to do about it? That sort of thing. For me, that was a compelling argument. So that's kind of why I went on my particular journey or whatever.
Hopefully we can discuss. I mean, one of the things that we might be able to do in a sort of development of this podcast, and I appreciate it's getting towards the end now, and you all got an evening to try and get something out of, but we can come on and discuss these things more, because I think the the psychological aspects of bureaucracy and the cruelty which it leads to is something that we could really get an interesting discussion going on a regular basis, because there's so many angles to it. And these, I mean, I would try and read this book, but there's so much limited hours in the day that it'd be good to hear from you guys some more on this. I'll just check. It looks like Sharon O, if you're watching this later, it looks like we lost you. I'm sorry we didn't get back to you in time for your question. But please come back another time and ask something. Anybody else? Is there anything else anyone would like to talk about this, or about stuff generally?
Just got a final thought, really, just kind of following on from what we've been saying about. So I think, so for me, the continual message I've got from delivering training, well, yeah, when I deliver training, people really love it. They kind of finish the day, it's all good. But they all know that by challenging the council, they're rocking the boat and their funding's at risk. And that just seems to be implicit. People know that if they put their head above the parapet, there will be real world consequences. And I'm not quite sure how true that is. Again, Hannah Arendt talks about this kind of thing of when, try not to say the word in case it affects the algorithm, but basically, when the stuff happened in World War II that was ridiculous. So first of all, members of the public who basically didn't have a stomach for doing what they were doing, what the Germans were doing, there was no punishment for it. They were just kind of taken to a different task. And you actually had entire, like Denmark, for example, refused to give up their Jews, and there was no actual comeback for them. You know, everyone kind of was a bit scared of the Germans, but they just kind of stood up to them. And actually, there's no actual consequences. And so I do wonder, like, you know, I wonder how many people it would take. You know, how many housing officers in a team would it take to just essentially dig the heels and say we're not going to break the law, for it to actually all kind of crumbling down. So there's kind of this, everyone's kind of terrified of, don't know, doing the right thing or kind of saying anything. But I just wonder if actually, you know, as I say, just a handful of people did it, then potentially you would kind of change entire, you know, kind of districts and towns, and you kind of really kind of help many hundreds of people. So yeah, so that's what I'm interested. Oh yeah, so Will, Sharon's just got back to you in the comments.
Oh, great. Sorry. Let me go down
yeah,
to
that's it for me.
so I was going to get my cursor up there on that. My mouse is stuck on the wrong screen. So yes, sorry. She said that you're still watching and will ask next week if that's okay. Yes, it is. Please. We look forward to hearing that. If you want to, what I'll do is I'll put the link to the next week's show up sooner. So if people want to ask questions, I think you should be able to ask questions once it's up in advance, or put a question on the live video version of this. But by all means, just tune in and ask the question and I'll get to you. I have been looking at this, and sorry, Cheeseface, I'm sorry I haven't put all your questions up or comments up there. But they are appreciated. Thank you. And so yeah, I think definitely the other thing I really want to try and do, and I will prepare for this, is try and do a show on the post office. The post office thing. I think I've said this before. The post office investigation or scandal and its implications, because as you said in your video there, Mike, it's just such a parallel. You can almost see if it was being called the homelessness inquiry, and each of those people was a different type of person involved in the process, you could almost, you know, rewrite the script so that those answers are answers to the questions. And why did you leave a family of, you know, 3 children in a place with mold and damp on the walls for 6 months, and then send a barrister to court to try and justify that? And you'd get the sort of, what's his name? Forgotten his name. His last name's Singh. I've forgotten his first name.
John L. Singh.
Yeah, John L. Singh. I mean, he would be sort of stammering and apologising, whereas we could see it all. I mean, and Paula Reynolds just sounds like to me like the chief executive. Every chief executive that's ever gone on there saying they're passionate about disability and helping people with mental health problems, and not knowing what the hell's going on in their actual housing department. But on that happy note, unless anybody else...
That's the thing though, there's lots of like comparisons, but in one sense, if it was ever going to be a homelessness or gatekeeping one, like the scale's too big. Like, how do you have an a whole country inquiry into every single service that has played a part in it? Like, and that's not me trying to say that the post office scandal is small, but like when you compare the two, like there's obviously comparisons, but the scale of the injustice.
Yeah. Although the post office, one of the things that's most significant about the post office thing is it's sort of led you to think, my God, the problem is so big that so many different institutions failed those postmasters, from that ridiculous union representative there was a judge in Scotland who, and even the Lord Chief, Neuberger, I mean, made a fool of himself, I think, by trying to get the judge, encouraging the post office to try and get the judge recused after the first court case. It's like every level. I mean, fortunately, the inquiry itself, I mean, the question I suppose will be, will the inquiry have that fatal problem that most inquiries just end up being a talking shop, where by the end of it, everyone's so bored of the subject that they leave them alone and just say, "Oh, I don't want to hear any more about this." And loads of lawyers have made money out of it, and the problem goes on. But anyway, thank you very much for taking part, everybody, and I'm thank you for your patience. I will try and do some more graphics and talking points for next time, so that we can go through an agenda and things to talk about. So until Thursday, I guess I'll say goodbye for now.
Cheers, we'll take it easy. See you, everyone.
So that should be the end. Oh, end.